John Farrell with the Farrell Law Firm. Today we're going to talk about how to protect your assets. But first, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We put out new videos almost every day. And make sure you hit the like button because, hey, every like helps. John Farrell with the Farrell Law Firm. To tell you a little bit about myself, I'm the author of Estate Planning for the Modern Family, and I was recently voted one of the top 3 lawyers here in Cobb County, Georgia, along with the law firm being voted one of the top 3 law firms here in Cobb County, Georgia. Today, we're going to talk about how to protect your assets. Much of estate planning has to do with the way a person's assets will be distributed upon their death, but that's only the tip of the iceberg. From smart incapacity planning to diligent probate avoidance, there's a lot that goes into creating a comprehensive estate plan. One important factor to consider is asset protection. One of the most important things to understand about asset protection is that not much good can come from trying to protect your assets reactively when surprised like situations like bankruptcy or divorce. The best way to take full advantage of estate planning in regards to asset protection is to prepare proactively long before these things ever come to pass, and hopefully many of them won't. As many of you know, when I was a younger lawyer, I used to work for banks, and the main part of my job was to try and find assets people had or tried to hide. People would try all kinds of things to try and hide their assets, and I've seen them all. It really wasn't that difficult for me to find their assets, but I was able to learn the strategies that worked. Today, whenever someone comes into the office, I will typically ask them the same thing, which is, what has prompted you to want to get your affairs in order? As you can imagine, I get a lot of different answers to that question. Some people that come in know that they want asset protection. Maybe they realize they need asset protection after discussing it. One thing I see a lot in my practice is asset protection in regards to rental properties. People will buy homes for rental purposes and discover that they need some type of asset protection. And so you might ask, who could benefit from asset protection? It's typically for those that maybe they own enough assets that they want to keep them, but they aren't too big to fail, as they say. Perhaps you plan to sell a business, or perhaps you plan to guarantee a loan, but a very typical situation I see in my practice relates to rental properties. But really, every person that has assets they want to protect is a potential candidate for some type of asset protection. One of the first things you can do when it comes to asset protection is to develop a gifting strategy. As you may know, there's an $18,000 gift tax exemption, meaning you can give away $18,000 to any person without incurring a gift tax. You might imagine that I find a lot of people come into my office that come in and they think if they have a son who's married and has a couple of children that they can leave $18,000 to the son and that's kind of it. No, the way it works is that you can really give it to anybody. So you can give $18,000 to your son, give $18,000 to his wife, give $18,000 to each of your 2 grandchildren, and then you have $72,000 that you have given away that will not incur any gift tax. The way this protects your assets is that you've simply given the assets away and you don't own them anymore. So we always discuss gifting strategies with people that come in that may need to protect some assets. The next thing you can do, and something we discuss with people that come into the office, is exemption planning. You may be familiar with some of these things, but some things are already exempt from creditors, like retirement plans. Another thing that is exempt from creditors is a portion of your wages. And so there are certain exemptions that people have that they may not even realize they have. So taking some money and putting it into a retirement plan will help shield your assets from creditors. I don't practice in Florida, but I happen to know this about Florida. They have a homestead exemption there, and so that's another type of exemption you may be able to take advantage of. And so the first couple of things we'll talk about is gifting strategies and exemption planning. The next thing we'll talk about is setting up a spendthrift trust for loved ones. Maybe you've heard of the term spendthrift, but maybe you haven't. But a spendthrift is essentially someone who is not too savvy with their own money. The great thing about a spendthrift trust is that the trust assets are not subject to creditors, and the beneficiary, perhaps your children, they can't pledge the trust assets to others. They may do this as an example, wanting to take a loan from somewhere, and they'll say something like, well, I can offer the trust that's in my name as security. Well, they can't do that with a spendthrift trust. And so it really protects them from themselves in a lot of cases. And it's designed to help people protect assets of someone in their family who might be considered what we call a spendthrift. The third thing we'll discuss with people, and this is in the context of rental properties, but any other type of business interest they may have that they may not have necessarily considered, but it mostly comes up with rental properties. Let me give you an example. Right now, I'm representing a doctor and she uses her discretionary income to buy rental properties. She's been doing this for quite some time, but whenever she would buy a rental property, she would buy it in her own name, and before you knew it, she had tons of rental properties set up in her own name. The problem with doing it that way is that if someone were to slip and fall at one of your rental properties, it really opens up liability to all of the other rental properties if you have them in your own name. So one of the things that we have done for her is we have set up an LLC, a limited liability company, for each of the rental properties that she has. That way, if someone were to slip and fall at one of her rental properties, her real limit to liability is going to be that rental property for the most part. Her other rental properties, because they are owned by other LLCs, generally won't be subject to liability from a slip and fall from a single property. So it really protects her from any one given incident at one given rental property. We'll then take those membership interests in the LLCs and put them into what we call a revocable living trust for her. She is fairly young and she's got a long life ahead of her and perhaps even many more rental properties that she'll buy down the road. But at this point, the revocable living trust is going to work well for her. There are other types of trusts that she might be able to take advantage of, but for her, the revocable living trust is going to work out well. So we'll transfer her membership interests into those and they'll avoid the probate process also. By the way, had something happened to her while all of those rental properties were in her own name, it would have been quite the ordeal to try to get those rental properties out of her estate to her beneficiaries or to her heirs. So that's another benefit to creating the LLCs and putting those into what we call the revocable living trust. I want you to notice we have not discussed setting up land trusts for these rental properties. I know that there are other creators who say that putting these rental properties in a land trust is the way to go, but I've done other videos on dispelling the myths with these land trusts, and I'll put a link in the description below where you'll want to check those out. Those land trusts really don't provide you with anonymity or asset protection the way you'd like, so be sure to check out those videos. So we've talked about different levels of protection. The gifting strategy is probably one of the lowest on the totem pole, so to speak, lowest on the ladder. And the next on the ladder is exemption planning. Maybe next on the ladder is a spendthrift trust, and next on the ladder is setting up LLCs for rental properties. You keep going up the ladder as far as protection goes, and the next one you might come to is what we call the Domestic Asset Protection Trust. We call them DAPTs for short, DAPTs. As you can imagine, just from the name itself, it is a trust that is set up on American soil that allows you to protect your assets. Not every state allows it. I'm licensed in Georgia, Tennessee, and Texas. Tennessee allows for domestic asset protection trusts, but Georgia does not. It's a very powerful tool to allow you to protect your assets that we can do here on American soil. Now, further up the ladder, and this is probably at the top of the ladder, and this is probably the most comprehensive and most complex trust instrument that we use to protect our clients' assets, but we have clients who need this, and so it's something that they can do. This is called a Foreign Asset Protection Trust, or FAPT for short, FAPT. And as you can imagine from the name, it's one that is set up in an offshore location or in another country that will add an extra layer of protection to a client who might need it. As an example, you might set up this trust in a country like Nevis. Nevis happens to be an island in the Caribbean, and they have asset protection laws there that are very complex and work well for people that are trying to protect their assets. It also happens to be the birthplace of Alexander Hamilton. Just an interesting little side note about the island of Nevis, and you don't have to pay me for that little tidbit. Another country that is very popular to set up a FAPT isn't an island at all. It happens to be the country of Belize. It's a country in Central America, and people use these versus DAPTs when they need an extra level of protection. Even though you can use the FAPTs, the DAPTs are becoming much more effective as the states compete with each other for the asset protection business. So we're using FAPTs less and less. One of the things that you want to remember is that nothing is bulletproof. There's no such thing as a perfect 10 when it comes to asset protection. There's a lot of factors that go into whether you'll be able to protect your assets or not. But using these asset protection strategies can be very effective in things like deterring litigation. If someone were to know that you've taken the steps to protect your assets in these ways, they may be less inclined to file a lawsuit against you, knowing it may be very difficult for them to access the assets at all. So it might deter them from filing the lawsuit in the first place. Another benefit to doing this type of asset protection planning is it can avoid damaging your reputation. If a lawsuit were to happen to be filed against you, it becomes part of the public record. Maybe you're in a profession where that's a concern to you, so setting up these domestic asset protection trusts and spendthrift trusts might help you avoid any damage to your reputation by deterring litigation in the first place. And those are just some of the side benefits you can expect from doing this type of asset protection. But again, nothing is bulletproof. It's very fact specific, and that's why working with an established estate planning attorney can help you with this type of asset protection. To summarize, asset protection trusts and quote-unquote land trusts are very popular, but we go through these items for comprehensive estate planning options. Number 1, gifting strategies. Number 2, exemption planning. Number 3, trusts such as spendthrift trusts. 4, for unincorporated businesses like you often find with rental properties, setting up LLCs for those. Number 5, we discuss DAPs, the Domestic Asset Protection Trust. And number 6, finally, we discuss FAPs, the Foreign Asset Protection Trust. That's really all we have to talk about today. If you've watched our videos for any amount of time, then you know what we do is we help people plan their estates. To do that, we've created a book called Estate Planning for the Modern Family. You're going to want to get a copy of this book, so I'm putting a link in the description below so you can order it online. It will tell you all about wills, trusts, powers of attorney, and the probate process. It also comes with a bonus. The bonus is if you have trouble sleeping at night, you can read it and it will get you right to sleep, so make sure you read it in the morning. If you want to learn a little bit more about the firm or maybe schedule a free consultation for yourself, give us a call at 678-809-4922. That's 678-809-4922. I'm also putting in the link in the description below so you can reach out to us to schedule that free consultation. Alright, that's all we have for today. Make sure you subscribe to the channel because we put out new videos almost every day, and make sure you hit the like button because, hey, every like helps.